Hello, Python coders. My name is Jason, and I've been making a short series of videos on using PyQt and PySide. In today's video, I want to talk about the topic of data validation. More specifically, I want to talk about how to validate data that someone puts into one of your forms. So in this case, I have a simple form here that's going to take in an employee ID and an employee name. I've also added a message box, which is just a label, to send feedback to whoever is using this particular form. Other than that, it's pretty standard, pretty simple little data form. So let's go into PyCharm. And what we're going to do first is I'm just going to have a program here that's going to write my data into a MySQL database. So I have a table called employees, and in that employees table, I have an ID and a full name. If I look inside, right now I have nothing in there. And this code here performs no data validation whatsoever. But what I am going to do is I'm going to write the data to the database. Now this write record code is not very important for our purposes of discussion, but I'm going to run this. And you'll see that if we do everything correctly, so if we put a number in the employee ID, and then if we put a valid name in the name field, you'll see that it will add the record to the database and tell me that the employee has been added. If I go to my employees database and refresh, you'll see that it's in there. However, in that particular run, everything went perfectly fine. But what happens if everything goes wrong? So in my employee ID field, I can type anything. So I could type in the employee name. And in the employee name field, I could put in a string of numbers. If I hit enter, you'll see that the code gets an error because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to change the employee ID to an integer before I write it to the database. Well, obviously I can't do that because I typed in John Smith. The other problem here is what if I just put in blanks? So I don't put anything in here and I hit OK. Well, we see we get the same type of problem trying to change a blank to an integer. Also, if I put in an employee ID, but I don't put in an employee name and I hit OK, you'll see that it says employee added. But if I go to the database and I refresh, you'll see now I have an employee ID, but no employee name. Another big problem is if I put in an employee ID, and I'll take out that Y, if I put in a string of numbers for the employee name, you'll see it takes that just fine. So we have a bit of a mess. I think I went to college with this guy. Never mind. So what we're going to do is I'm going to delete all of these. And we're going to start adding some data validation in. So I've changed my code here a little bit in the validate to, which is instead of connecting my OK button directly to a write record function, I'm connecting it to a validate record function first. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do two simple checks. I'm going to check if either one of the fields on the form are blank, so they're empty. I'm going to set a message in the message field that says missing required fields, and then I'm going to return. If those two checks pass, then I'm going to write the record. So if we run this example, so now if I just hit OK, you'll see that it'll tell me that I'm missing required fields, which is true. Okay, I didn't type in anything in the employee ID or the employee name field. So that's one simple check done. However, we still have all the other problems. We can still put in invalid data in the employee ID. We can still put in nothing in the employee name. All right, so let's move on to example number 3. So in this case, we're not adding anything to our validate record. So we're still going to just check if they put blanks in, or put nothing in actually. However, if I go to the top of the program, you're going to see that I have added a class called numbers only. And what I'm doing here is I am subclassing a PySide or PyQt built-in class called QValidator. And what I'm going to do here is I've overridden the validate method provided by QValidator, and I have to pass in the string I want to validate and an index value. These will go in for me automatically. Then I'm going to establish, through the use of a regular expression, what do I want this field to have. So my pattern here, I'm setting it to be only 0 through 9. The first check that the validator is going to do is if the field is empty. So if the field is empty, it's going to pass back that that is acceptable. And I do this so that I can completely clear the field of anything typed in. If I didn't put this check in, it would not let me clear the field completely. So I have to set that to acceptable and then pass that back. If the pattern matches, so if I type in just 0 through 9, it's also going to set that to acceptable and let that go through. Otherwise, it's going to set this state value to invalid, and I won't be able to type the character in the field. So to demonstrate, and then I'm going to attach to my ID field, my line entry ID field, I'm going to set its validator to numbers only, and I'm actually calling this, so I have to put the parentheses in. So it's not like connecting the buttons where we don't call the function. In this case, we are actually calling the function, or the class in this case. All right, so if I run this, what you'll see now is I can put numbers in the employee ID field just fine. I can also completely wipe it out. However, I can't put in any characters, and I can't put in any special characters. So the only data that this is going to accept now is going to be numbers. And that's what we want. We want the employee ID to only be numerics. So this is a check that is happening as I type in each character. Okay, that numbers only function is being called each and every time. So that takes care of the employee ID field. However, we're still going to have the problems with the employee name. So let's take a look at program number 4. And I'm going to be doing two things. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add another class called validate name. And in this case, my pattern that I'm going to establish is not 0 through 9, but it's going to be capital A through Z, lowercase a through Z, and a blank. And I have to allow a blank because I'm going to be putting a space between the first name and the last name. Again, they are allowed to completely wipe the field out, clear the field. If my pattern matches my string, it'll set it to acceptable. However, if it doesn't, if I try to type in special characters or numbers, it's going to set it to invalid. There's also one other check that we need to do. And that is, what if they put nothing but spaces inside of the full name field? In my validate record function, I'm going to check that if they put in nothing but spaces in my full name field, I'm going to clear the field. I'm going to send a message that you're missing required fields, and I'm going to set the cursor focus to that full name field, and then I'm going to return. All right, so if I run this example, you'll see that on the employee ID, you can only put in numbers, can't put in anything else. Now in the employee name field, I can't put numbers in at all. No matter how much I try, it won't take a number. Special characters, the exact same thing. It will not take a special character. However, John Smith, it will take. And you'll see that it allows the space so I can put a first name and a last name. Now if I hit enter, the employee should be added. If I look at my employee table or employees table, you'll see my ID and John Smith. So the employee name field is slightly different because we're doing two separate checks. We're checking to see that they're not putting in numbers and special characters except for blank. And then we're also making sure that they don't put nothing but blanks. So if I look here on the employee ID, if I try to put in blanks for the employee name, if I hit enter, you'll see that it cleared the field and it told me that I'm missing a required field. And also, what I would normally do in a form like this is I would highlight the field that's in error. I didn't do that here, but you could do that through the use of palettes. So that should cover all of our validation. And again, when you are actually writing the record, so if you have a function similar to this, where you're just setting up your cursors in your database connection, and then you're going to write the records, you want all of your data to be validated well ahead of time before getting to this point. These exception blocks should only throw if there was, let's say you lost the connection to your database, something like that. You'll also capture constraint errors. So if you try to type in the same employee twice and you're checking that, it would also happen here. But we want to validate as much data upfront as we possibly can. And we can do that very easily through the use of validators. All right, let's go back to Qt Designer for a moment. I'm going to go ahead and close this. There is another way that we can validate data right at entry time. There are a few restrictions on this, but I do use this from time to time for specific fields. For instance, let's add a state field to this form. So I'm going to add a state field. And yes, it did put it in the form layout. Okay, we'll put a line edit next to it. And we're going to call this state. I'm going to rename this le_state. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add what's called an input mask to this line edit widget here. So I'm going to do my property editor. I'm going to type in input mask. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to establish that I only want 2 characters to be entered in. And I also want those characters to be translated to uppercase. So I'm going to use the greater than sign, and I'm going to type in 2 capital letter A's. I'm going to save it. Let's go back to our PyCharm. I'm going to retranslate this demo form window, and I have this set up to do that for me. If I run this code, you'll see that the cursor is slightly different. And my tab order is out of whack, but that's okay. So in my state field now, you'll see that I can only type in 2 letters. This would be for the state abbreviation. I can't type in numbers. I can't type in any special characters. The only thing that I can type in here is those 2 letters. And you'll see that no matter what I'm doing, it is going to translate them to uppercase for me. We can also use input masks for things like phone numbers, social security numbers. So I'm going to add another field to this, and I'm going to call it phone number. So where is my line edit? There it is. And I'm going to say phone number. We'll name this LE phone number. All right, and I'm going to add another input mask to this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say 000 dash 000 dash 0000. Okay, so a full American phone number. If I save this and go back to PyCharm, I can retranslate this to Python. If I run my application, now I have a phone number field, and you'll see that it actually has those dashes in there. If I type in here, I can't type in any characters. I can't type in any special characters. The only thing I can put in here are numbers. And you'll see it looks just like a phone number with the dashes. Another common example for this is doing social security numbers, where you have 3 digits, 2 digits, and then 4 digits. So that is the other method that we can use to validate data up front and ensure that we are typing in just the data we want is through the use of an input mask. Typically what I would do is I would do both. I use validators for certain situations, especially like this employee ID field, or I would use an input mask. For instance, for a phone number field, we only want that phone number field to be so large. We only want so many digits passed. Using an input mask will ensure that we are going to be getting the correct amount of digits, and also visually it'll put those the dashes in between. Same thing with social security numbers. I commonly use an input mask for the state field. So if I'm going to put a state in, I can use the greater than sign to translate to uppercase, and the 2 capital A's mean that I can only put in uppercase letters and only 2 of them. I'm going to include in this video description, I will include a link to the documentation on PySide on input masks. They're extremely powerful. There's a lot of good information in there, and you may find that it fits your needs more often than you would think. Also, I would look up the documentation on the QValidator. There's a lot you can do with QValidator. For instance, what I could do is with my state field here, I can validate very simply that they're putting in 2 characters, but I'm not validating if that's a valid state. In my validator, I could. If they pass in, if 2 characters get passed in, I could then go out and see, is that a valid state or not? All right. I think that pretty much covers it for today. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments. And other than that, happy coding.